Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are doing our week in review. This will cover, I believe, what was it? The 7th, 14th, 13th, 12th, 11th. Yeah, let's see, redo this. 14th, 13th, 12th, 11th, 10th, not 8th. So 8th through 14th. Yes, I suck at counting backwards. Anyway, the weekend review where we cover sports, news, science, and history for that week. Normally, I had this out earlier on a Saturday, but I just didn't get to it, so it's going to be out on a Sunday instead. Um, so with that, let's go ahead and look if we can at um, sports. We know the NFL and Premier League is over at the moment. Collegiately, I think baseball's going on. I know there's a number of other sports, but there's so many sports in collegiate that it's hard to keep up with them all. Honestly, it is. I probably should do a better job on that. Again, let me know if you would love to see me give some attention to anything softball, um, volleyball, um, swim, swimming competitions, collegiate tennis. I haven't really mentioned the Frozen Four too much, but I guess I could do that. I don't know when it is. But anyway, for now, we'll go ahead and skip ahead to the NBA, which just finished up its finals with the Toronto Raptors winning over the Golden State Warriors 4 games to 2. So Toronto is the 2019 NBA champions. Congratulations, Toronto Raptors and the city of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Enjoy your championship. With that, let's go over and look at the NHL. Trying to straighten up the books in my library while it loads here. In the finals for Lord Stanley's Cup, the St. Louis Blues have defeated the Boston Bruins 4 games to 3. So that one went a full 7 games, with the St. Louis Blues defeating the Boston Bruins. Congratulations to the city of St. Louis and the St. Louis Blues. Enjoy your championship and your time with Lord Stanley's Cup. And now, let's look at Major League Baseball standings. As it loads up here, we'll once again offer congratulations to Toronto and St. Louis for having their championships. It's taking its time to load here. Get me a drink while that's going on. There we go. So let's start off with the American League East. Leading the division is the New York Yankees at a record of 42-27. But they are only a half game ahead of the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, who are 42-28. So right now, it's very close in the American League East. Behind Tampa Bay, we have Boston, who is 5.5 games out, so only 5 behind Tampa Bay. But then they fall off quite a bit. Toronto Blue Jays are 17.5 games back, and the Baltimore Orioles are 21.5 games back. Now, let's look at the American League Central. The Minnesota Twins lead the division with a record of 47-22. And they're doing quite well because their next closest competition is 11 games back, the Cleveland Indians, who have a record of 36-33. Chicago White Sox are 13 games back. Detroit Tigers 21 games back, and the poor Kansas City Royals are 25.5 games back. So let's look at the American League West. Leading the division is the Houston Astros with a record of 48-23. They are followed 9.5 games back by the Texas Rangers, who have a record of 38-32. Then you have Oakland, 12.5 games back. The Oakland Athletics, and then the Los Angeles Angels with a record that puts them 13 games back. So they're only a half game behind Oakland, but they're 13 games back behind Houston. And the Seattle Mariners are 19 games back. In the National League East, the Atlanta Braves lead with a record of 41-30. Behind them by only a game and a half are the Philadelphia Phillies with a record of 39-31. So still very tight in the National League East. But behind the Phillies, we have the New York Mets, who are behind by 6.5 games. Then the Washington Nationals, who are behind by 8.5 games. And then the Miami Marlins, who are behind by 14.5 games. In the National League Central, we have the Chicago Cubs with a record of 39-31. And they are actually tied with the Milwaukee Brewers, who have a record of 39-31. So that is very interesting. And to make it even more interesting, the St. Louis Cardinals are only 3.5 games back with a record of 35 and 34. Pittsburgh is 8 games back, and Cincinnati is also only 8 games back. So the NL Central is very, very tight this year. NL Central. In the NL West, the Los Angeles Dodgers lead with a record of 47 and 24. The next team is the Arizona Diamondbacks, who are 9.5 games behind with a record of 38 and 34. Then the Colorado Rockies, who are only 10 games behind. So while they're 10 games behind the Dodgers, they're only a half game behind the Diamondbacks. So that'll be interesting. Next is the San Diego Padres, who are 12.5 games out. And then the San Francisco Giants, who are 15.5 games behind. And that is the current look at Major League Baseball's standings. We won't look at the playoff standings right now because we did that last week. But with that done, let's go ahead and look up some information on science. It's important to know your science. Everybody should know some science. Come on, there we go. It was taking it a moment to load. Excuse me. Got choked a bit there. So, let's look at sciencemag.org. And as it loads, I've tried to expand what we do for science. So, we'll look at Science Mag and then the other one. And then I've started also looking at Star Talk as well as TED as far as what they have on YouTube. So, and some Veritasium. But anyway, we'll wait here. It's taking forever to load up. All right. A communication network among immunization cells gives rise to colitis. How to make almonds palatable? Okay. Cassini's grand finale. This psychologist explains why people confess to crimes they didn't commit. So they have a picture of that psychologist. People confess to crimes they did not commit. That's interesting. Early use of cannabis. So we found some evidence that it may have been an early use. How a disturbed gut microbiome may dysregulate fat tissue in obesity. And rising methane, a new climate challenge. The World Health Organization unexpectedly declines again to call Ebola outbreak a global emergency. I don't know if it'd be global, but it's definitely an emergency over the continent of Africa. This diseased spine may hold clues to early dog-human relationship. The National Institute of Health should ask both institutions and investigators to report sexual harassment findings, advisory group says. Brazilian government accused of suppressing data that would call its war on drugs into question. Russian geneticist answers challenges to make his gene to plan to make his gene edited babies. House Democrats move to block part of Trump's fetal tissue policy. And 500 million hoverflies immigrate to the United Kingdom each year. And the benefits to farmers are huge. Okay. And that's from sciencemag.org. Let's look at, scroll down, sciencenews.org. And it's taking it some time to load up here. I do apologize. Okay, there we go. The dim galaxy Antæa 2 was found orbiting the Milky Way in 2018. It's a bit bigger than the large Magellanic Cloud, another satellite galaxy, but contains far fewer stars. Huh. So you wonder, is it perhaps an older galaxy that's just started fading since it's got so few stars? Or is it a younger one that's just not been looked at? Come on. Excavations of tombs such as this at a cemetery in western China yielded evidence that people burned cannabis and inhaled its fumes during rituals for the dead around 2,500 years ago. So early use of cannabis. A chemical compound binds to a never before seen pocket on the protein shell of an enterovirus, preventing replication. Huh. That's interesting. Come on now. Over the last 80 years, wild animals such as bats have replaced dogs as the major cause of rabies-related deaths in Americans. Luckily, they don't tend to bother people too much. But still, that's kind of sad to know that, bats are the cause of rabies. when they actually serve a purpose. They do feast on bugs and stuff during the night. And likely any interactions between humans and bats is either usually a human at fault or accidental. So, but anyway, table salt may be hiding in Europa's underground sea. Huh. Many of the world's rivers are flush with dangerous levels of antibiotics. Massive superflares have been erupting from stars like the sun. When fighting lice, focus on kids' heads, not hats or toys. Which, I mean, it should be a duh. It's the hair. Some Canadian lakes still store DDT in their mud. The National Weather Service has launched its new U.S. forecasting model. People may have smoked marijuana in rituals 2,500 years ago in Western China, which it mentioned in the other article. And there's bats beat out dogs as the main cause of rabies deaths in the U.S. And there's astronomers may have spotted the ghost galaxy that hit the Milky Way long ago. So it's okay. They believed it collided with the Milky Way at one point. Extra fingers, often seen as useless, can offer major dexterity advantages. A tiny crater on viruses behind the common code may be their Achilles heel, as we mentioned about the chemical compound that attaches to the pocket of them. These knotted cords may hide the first evidence that the Incas collected taxes. Genealogy companies could struggle to keep clients' data from police. Great, another thing we got to worry about getting into the hands of police. Some fungi trade phosphorus with plants like savvy stockbrokers. The U.S. is still using many pesticides that are banned in other countries. Unfortunately, they don't want to listen to the people. It's all about that money. And carbon plays a starring role in the new book Symphony in C. So, there we go. That's that. Now, let's look at some of the newer issues on the science that we've been looking into while it's loading up here. Hopefully, everyone understands why science is important. I've seen already today, just today, people passing around, climate denying websites. And I'm like, after just a little research on the internet, I'm finding, yeah, he's been debunked already. Why do you push these people's lies? They've even got research that is shown to be so thin and not scientifically sound. And it just bothers me that people want to be climate deniers when the scientific research is there that climate change is real. And we're on a tipping scale, idiots. I hate to be so blunt about it, but we are at a tipping point. We can't remain, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You have got no proof. Yes, we have got proof. We've shown it over and over and over and over. You just don't want to have to deal out the money to face the facts. And it just kind of annoys me. But anyway, let's start out with Veritasium. Do they have anything? Okay. Can you swim in shade balls? And shade balls are, of course, the balls they use to cover the surface of water. I think it's meant to keep a lot of dehydration and to cool water down. And to keep it from dehydrating so much and to cool the water down. So they have a little video on can you swim in shade balls. Which is very interesting. Now, let's see. TED, Technology, Education, Design. It's a great, great place to go if you are very much into science. They've got Facebook's role in Brexit and the threat to democracy. The difference between healthy and unhealthy love. 3 ideas, 3 contradictions, or not. Don't know what it's fully about, but my life as a work of art. Okay. And then how supercharged plants could slow climate change. So that's what they have on the TED website. And for those of you who like smaller videos, there's also TED Ed, but I won't include it in here. Now, let's go up a ways to look at Star Talk is what I wanted to look at. See if I can find it. There it is. On Star Talk recently, this week. Let's see, they've got Searching for Life in the Universe and Physics All Around Us. 2 of the recent videos they've had. And like always, the Star Talk videos are always fun, so I do recommend checking it out if you've never listened to a Star Talk broadcast. I really do recommend checking that out. And that is the science for this week. Now, let's look at history. Okay, come on, poor computer. It needs to be cleaned out, but it is what it is. 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So yeah, 8 through 14. All right, we'll start on June the 8th. June the 8th, 1968, James Earl Ray, suspect in the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination, is arrested. So yeah, unfortunately, we start out with a horrible moment, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. 1968 was a horrid year. Richard Nixon came to power. We was struggling with Vietnam. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. It was just, yeah, a horrible year, considered one of the worst in recent American history. But anyway, June the 8th, 1967, Israel attacks the USS Liberty. During the Six-Day War, Israeli aircraft and torpedo boats attacked the USS Liberty in international waters off Egypt's Gaza Strip. Let's see. In sports, June the 8th, 1966, the NFL and AFL announced their merger, which gives us the modern day NFL, because the NFL became the NFC and the AFL became the AFC, splitting the league into two conferences. And the AFL didn't seem to have that much on the NFL, because during their meetup in what would become known as the Super Bowl, the NFL, yeah, was kicking the AFL's butt in Super Bowl one and Super Bowl two. It wasn't until Super Bowl three that the AFL won one. And by Super Bowl four, that was the last one they had. I, I think it may have been the last one they had before they were officially merged. Yeah, though it took until the 1970 season for the leagues to fully unite. It was announced in '66, So they were announced. That's why they played the Super Bowl, but they were still independent leagues. Okay. And it wasn't until 4 years later in 70. President Truman gives order regarding release of classified scientific information on June the 8th, 1945. Scientific information from previously top secret World War II documents. Okay. June the 8th, 1949. George Orwell's 1984 is published. On June the 8th, George Orwell's novel of a dystopian future, 1984, is published. The novel's all-seeing leader, known as Big Brother, becomes a universal symbol for intrusive government and oppressive bureaucracy. Let's see. June the 8th, 1984, Ghostbusters released. June the 8th in 1984, the now classic comedy Ghostbusters is released in theaters across the U.S. Produced and directed by Ivan Reitman, Ghostbusters starred Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Harold Ramis as disgraced psychology professors in New York City, who turn to capturing the supernatural. June the 8th, 1913, forensic evidence captures a murderous father. Two farmers walking near a quarry outside of Edinburgh, Scotland, find two small dead bodies floating in the water, tied together. Although the bodies were so waterlogged that authorities could barely confirm they were human. Okay, so yeah, they identified and used forensic evidence to capture the father who committed the murder. June the 8th, 1990. As Nasty as They Wanna Be causes store owner's arrest. Charles Freeman, the owner of EC Records store in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, is charged with illegally selling the rap album As Nasty as They Wanna Be to an undercover officer. And that's, of course, the album by Two Live Crew. Yeah, as a kid, I remember listening to Two Live Crew. And June the 8th, 1949, the FBI report names Hollywood figures as communists. Hollywood figures including film stars Frederick March, John Garfield, Paul Mooney, and Edward G. Robinson were named in the FBI report as Communist Party members. That's, of course, during all the hysteria following World War II and the early Cold War. Now, let's look at June the 9th. My legs. June the 9th. Come on now, computer, work with me here. It's not wanting to work for some reason. Maybe if we scroll up here, there we go. There we go. June the 9th. Or 10th. Oh, it was edited on 10th. Sorry. June the 9th, 1973. Secretariat wins Triple Crown in breathtaking style. It was the first horse since Citation in 1948 to win the Triple Crown, which of course consists of the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont Stakes. Alright, let's see what else happened on June the 9th. June the 9th, 1534. June the 9th, 1534. French navigator Jacques Cartier discovers the St. Lawrence River. French navigator Jacques Cartier becomes the first European explorer to discover the St. Lawrence River in present-day Quebec, Canada. In 1534, Cartier was commissioned by King Francis I of France to explore the North American lands in search of riches. June the 9th, 1772. British vessel burned off Rhode Island in an incident that some regard as the first naval engagement of the American Revolution. Colonists aboard the Gaspee, a British vessel that ran aground off the coast of Rhode Island, and they set it aflame as it was pursuing the Hannah, an American smuggling ship. So, even though technically the war was seen as starting in 1776, this event took place four years before, in 1772. Let's see. July the 9th, 1886, President Cleveland asks Congress to ratify the extradition agreement with Japan. On this day in 1886, President Grover Cleveland submits a proposal to the Senate that outlines conventions for extraditing criminals of Japanese nationality who had committed crimes on U.S. soil and then escaped to Japan, um, back to the U.S. for trial. June the 9th, 1856, Mormon handcart pioneers depart for Salt Lake City. In an extraordinary demonstration of resolve and fortitude, nearly 500 Mormons leave Iowa City and head west for Salt Lake City, carrying all their goods and supplies in two-wheeled handcarts. I remember this incident too. June the 9th, 1993, Hollywood Madam Heidi Fleiss arrested in a sting. On this day in 1993, a now infamous Madam to the Stars, Heidi Fleiss, is arrested as part of a sting operation run by the Los Angeles Police and Beverly Hills Police Departments and the U.S. Justice Department. June the 9th, 1954. Have you no sense of decency? Senator Joseph McCarthy is asked in hearing. And of course, McCarthy's known for the Red Scare that enveloped the U.S. during the early Cold War. In a dramatic confrontation, Joseph Welch, special counsel for the U.S. Army, lashes out at Senator Joseph McCarthy during hearings on whether communism has infiltrated the U.S. armed forces. Welch's verbal assault marked the end of McCarthy's power during the anti-communist hunt. Let's see. June the 9th, 1915, William Jennings Bryan resigns as the U.S. Secretary of State. That's a name you'll see a lot if you study history, William Jennings Bryan. At the turn of in the early 1900s, he was a major character. On June the 9th, 1915, United States Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan resigns due to his concerns over President Woodrow Wilson's handling of the crisis generated by German submarines sinking of the British cruiser Lusitania the previous month. And June the 9th, 1944, the Red Army invades Karelian Isthmus in Finland. On this day in 1944, Russia penetrates into East Karelia in Finland as it fights to gain back control of territory that had already been ceded to it. So, yeah. Stalin was just, he's a monster. There was no doubt Stalin was a monster. There is no doubt about that. I ain't saying the U.S. don't have monsters. We have monsters. Trump, Bolton. Unfortunately, in positions of power. What are we going to do? June the 10th, 1752, Benjamin Franklin flies kite during thunderstorm. On this day in 1752, Benjamin Franklin flies a kite during a thunderstorm and collects ambient electrical charge in a Leyden jar, enabling him to demonstrate a connection between lightning and electricity. I really like Franklin. Franklin is if there's someone we want to claim as an American hero, it should be Benjamin Franklin. He did so much. Inventor, politician, author, and ladies' man. Because let's not forget, he was up in age when he went to represent the U.S. and when he went to ask France for help with the U.S. Revolution. He delighted the French ladies. Let's see. June the 10th, 1940, Norway surrenders to Germany. After 2 months of desperate resistance, the last surviving Norwegian and British defenders of Norway are overwhelmed by the Germans. The country is forced to capitulate to the Nazis. June the 10th, 1980, Nelson Mandela writes from prison. In South Africa, the African National Congress makes public a statement by Nelson Mandela, the long imprisoned leader of the anti-apartheid movement. The message, smuggled out of Robben Island prison under great risk, read, "Unite, mobilize, fight on." June the 10th, 1692, first Salem witch hanging. In Salem Village in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Bridget Bishop, the first colonist to be tried in the Salem witch trials, is hanged after being found guilty of the practice of witchcraft. And of course, it spread and became an epidemic in which numerous people were tried and found guilty of witchcraft. Uh, and when someone from a larger town in the Massachusetts Bay Colony came and said, "Enough of this." June the 10th, 1935, Alcoholics Anonymous founded. June the 10th, 1940, Italy declares war on France and Great Britain. Italy had only become a country in the 1850s, I'm wanting to say. I know it was in the 1800s. They were still city-states up to that point. It didn't become a unified country until the 1800s, so it hadn't even maybe 100 years. It might have been the 1830s, but yeah. And the same way with Germany, it became a country in the 1850s. Before it was the Holy Roman Empire. So these countries that hadn't been countries for but maybe 100 years were like, we're declaring war. Of course, part of it for Germany was the results of World War One, which was because of a tendency of countries to have secretive treaties. I gotta sit up. But anyway, June the 10th, 1917, the Italians renew battle on mountain tops in Trentino. On June the 10th, 1917, Italian troops launched a renewed assault on the Austro-Hungarian positions in the mountains of Trentino, not Tarantino, but Trentino region in northern Italy on the border with Austria. World War One was because of these secretive deals. Nobody wanted, it to be found out and said, we'll be your allies. So if you're in trouble, we'll come and defend you. That's kind of what happened. There was a country that declared war on another country, and so they came into the picture and said, we're going to defend that country. But because they came in, it required other treaties to start going off. Yeah, the U.S. mostly stayed out of it until about 1917, I think. The war ended in 1918, so. But oddly enough, the Italians were with the Allies in the First World War, but they were part of the Axis powers in the Second. That's because they had their own Trump called Mussolini. Anyway. June the 10th, 1944, Joe Nuxhall makes his Major League Baseball debut at the age of 15-year-old, becoming the youngest player ever to play Major League Baseball. He pitches a game for the Cincinnati Reds, throws 2/3 of the ninth inning in an 18-0 loss to the St. Louis Cardinals. Well, still 15-year-old. What else? June the 10th, 1881. Tolstoy disguises himself as a peasant and leaves on a pilgrimage. On this day on June the 10th, 1881, Count Leo Tolstoy sets off on a pilgrimage to a monastery disguised as a peasant. He had already produced two of his greatest masterpieces at that point, War and Peace and Anna Karenina. Okay, that's interesting. June the 10th, 1990. So June the 9th, we saw the record store owner arrested. June the 10th, 1990, Luther Campbell and his fellow Two Live crew members are arrested on obscenity charges. Luther Campbell and his fellow Two Live crew members are arrested in Florida on obscenity charges related to their album As Nasty as They Want to Be. Of course, they end up having to be released. And June the 10th, 1953, Eisenhower rejects calls for U.S. isolationism. In a forceful speech, President Dwight D. Eisenhower strikes back at critics of his Cold War foreign policy. He insisted that the United States was committed to the worldwide battle against communism and that he would maintain a strong U.S. defense. I don't believe in isolationism, but I sure as hell don't believe in all the damn wars we're going into. We're still in the damn Afghanistan conflict that happened after 9/11. You know, we need to stop some of these wars. Period. We don't need to go to war with Iran. That's why I say Bolton and Trump are monsters. And Pompeo, too, since he wants to help push that crap. June the 11th, 1986, Ferris Bueller's Day Off released in theaters. Which is a good movie, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. June the 11th, 1963, the University of Alabama desegregated. Facing federalized Alabama National Guard troops, Alabama Governor George Wallace ends his blockade of the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa and allows 2 African American students to enroll. So that's an interesting part of the civil rights movement. June the 11th, 1509, Henry VIII marries his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Henry VIII of England marries Catherine of Aragon, the first of 6 wives he will have in his lifetime. And it was because she had yet to produce a male heir, and thus he wanted to divorce her. The Roman Catholic Church was like, no, you need to keep your marriage sacred. And Henry's like, no, I need a male heir, and thus created the Church of England, or the Protestant Church. June the 11th, 1944, D-Day landing forces converge. 5 days after the D-Day landing the 5 Allied landing groups, made up of some 330,000 troops, link up in Normandy to form a single solid front across northwestern France. June the 11th, 1943, Operation Corkscrew is launched by Britain. On this day in 1943, after 10 days of bombing runs, Britain lands troops on the Italian island of Pantelleria. I know in Spanish it's a it's a Y sound. Pantelleria. Not sure what it is in Italian. Off the southern coast of Sicily in Operation Corkscrew. Okay. June the 11th, 1963. Buddhist immolates himself in protest. Buddhist monk Quang Duc publicly burns himself to death in a plea for President Ngo Dinh Diem to show charity and compassion to all religions. Diem, a Catholic who had been oppressing the Buddhist majority, remained stubborn despite continued Buddhist protests. Hmm. Yeah, that's a famous image, though, the Buddhist who set fire to himself, immolated. All right. June the 11th, 1963. That's also talking about the opening of the University of Alabama. On this day, on June the 11th of 1963, President John F. Kennedy issues Presidential Proclamation 3542, forcing Alabama Governor George Wallace to comply with federal court orders allowing 2 African American students to register for the summer session at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. June the 11th, 1949. Hank Williams Sr. makes his Grand Ole Opry debut. In the tragically short life of country legend Hank Williams Sr., there were many broken relationships, both personal and professional, that resulted from his self-destructive behavior. But one such relationship was with the most important institution in his chosen field, the Grand Ole Opry. He would later be kicked out of the Grand Ole Opry. But to this day, when you talk about country music legends and history, you have to talk about Hank Williams Sr. June the 11th, 1989, China issues warrant for Tiananmen dissidents sheltering in the U.S. Embassy. In the wake of the Tiananmen Square massacre on June the 4th, China issues a warrant for a leading Chinese dissident who had taken refuge in the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. Mm-mm-mm. Now, let's look at June the 12th. And it's taking its time to load on up. I think I'm gonna get me something to drink. Yeah. Yeah, it's taking its time here. Come on, June the 12th. Hurry up and load. You're just circling around. Come on. Yeah. If you are interested in country music, look up Hank Williams Sr. He is considered a man, a true country music musician, because during his time, many of the country music stars put on airs, so to speak. They weren't normal people. They just came in, performed, and then dressed back in their suit and ties. While Hank Williams Sr., he was an actual person like anyone else. He wasn't one of these suit and tie guys. He believed in what he played and he tried to live that kind of life. But unfortunately, he lived it too well because of his excesses in alcohol and his self-destructive behavior. I think he died at like age 29. Uh, but he is one of the most influential of country music stars. Anyway, June the 12th. June the 12th, 2016. Terrorist gunman attacks the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. As Latin music blared inside Pulse, one of Orlando's biggest nightclubs, on June the 12th, 2016, a gunman forced his way inside and opened fire on the predominantly gay crowd. In the end, 49 people were dead and dozens more injured, in what was at the time the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. That was just in 2016. It's already been broken. I think it was the Vegas shooting that broke it. And then, June the 12th, 2017, Otto Warmbier returns from North Korean prison in a coma. June the 12th, 2017, Otto Warmbier, a 22-year-old student who was taken prisoner in North Korea 17 months earlier, returned home to the United States in a comatose state. Ugh. So let's see. June the 12th, 1963, civil rights leader Medgar Evers is assassinated. In the driveway outside his home in Jackson, Mississippi, African American civil rights leader Medgar Evers is shot to death by white supremacist Byron De La Beckwith. It's ridiculous. We're still having fights. The full rights still haven't been granted, even though we've got amendments to the Constitution and laws that should say otherwise. All right. What else have we got? Anything else? Ooh, June the 12th, 1876. Journalist headed for Little Bighorn files dispatch. Marcus Kellogg, a journalist traveling with Custer's 7th Cavalry, files one of his last dispatches before being killed at the Battle of Little Bighorn. A native of Ontario, Canada, Kellogg migrated with his family to New York in 1835. Hmm. Hmm. June the 12th, 1942. Anne Frank receives a diary. Anne Frank, a young Jewish girl living in Amsterdam, receives a diary for her 13th birthday. A month later, she and her family went into hiding from the Nazis in rooms behind her father's office. Okay. June the 12th, 1897. Deadly quake hits India, killing more than 1,500. June the 12th, in 1897, a powerful earthquake in Assam, India, triggers deadly landslides and waves, killing more than 1,500 people. The quake, with a devastating 8.8 magnitude, struck at 5 p.m. near the town of Shillong in northern India. And June the 12th, 1987, President Reagan challenges Gorbachev to tear down this wall. As opposed to Donald Trump, who was, we need a wall. I swear, Trump's an idiot. I don't know how anybody worships the man. It's either complete stupidity or the misinformation fed to them by right wing news sites, notably Fox News. June the 13th, 1966, the Miranda rights are established in a Supreme Court decision handed down in the case of Miranda versus Arizona. That's the ones we go, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed to you. But yeah, that's the Miranda rights. So it was essentially racist police, because it starts with a 18-year-old Phoenix woman who said she'd been abducted, driven to the desert, and raped. Detectives questioning her story gave her a polygraph test, but the results were inconclusive. However, tracking the license plate number of a car that resembled that of her attackers brought police to Ernesto Miranda, who had a prior record as a peeping Tom. Although the victim did not identify Miranda in a lineup, he was brought into police custody and interrogated. What happened next is disputed, but officers left the interrogation with a confession that Miranda later recanted, unaware that he didn't have to say anything at all. The confession was extremely brief and differed in certain respects from the victim's account of the crime. However, Miranda's appointed defense attorney, who was paid a grand total of $100, didn't call any witnesses at the ensuing trial, and Miranda was convicted. While Miranda was in Arizona State Prison, the ACLU took up his appeal, claiming that the confession was false and coerced. The Supreme Court overturned his conviction, but Miranda was retried and convicted in October 1966 anyway, despite the relative lack of evidence against him. Remaining in prison until 1972, Ernesto Miranda was later stabbed to death in the men's room of a bar after a poker game in January 1976. As a result of the case against Miranda, each and every person must now be informed of his or her rights when in custody and about to be interrogated. That is the Miranda rights. June 13th, 1983, Pioneer 10 departs the solar system. After more than a decade in space, Pioneer 10, the world's first outer planetary probe, leaves the solar system. The next day, it radioed back its first scientific data on interstellar space. I wonder what since happened to Pioneer 10. It was set to be the first outer planetary probe, and it finally left the solar system, not our galaxy, but just the solar system, the sun, and our planets, and the belts around it that make up our solar system, which is just one of many in our galaxy, the Milky Way, which is just one of many galaxies in the universe. If you want to get even more particular, you can say galactic cluster, which I don't know which galactic cluster we're in, but yeah, the universe is huge. A lot bigger than people really think. You see these stars out in the sky? They are suns for other planets. Think about that. These stars you see are suns. And they're likely just within our galaxy. Although there is possibility you are seeing some on the outer edge, but I say it's quite difficult to see with the naked eye. Because in our galaxy alone, we have multiple stars. Not just hundreds, not just thousands. It may even be more than millions, but billions of stars just in our galaxy. And I know in so many years, the Andromeda and the Milky Way galaxies will collide and reform a bigger galaxy. I don't know if we'll be alive to see it because there's morons who don't understand climate change. But anyway, June the 13th, 1381, peasant army marches into London. During the peasants' revolt, a large mob of English peasants led by Wat Tyler marches into London and begins burning and looting the city. Huh. June the 13th, 1967, Thurgood Marshall appointed to the Supreme Court. President Lyndon Johnson appoints U.S. Court of Appeals Judge Thurgood Marshall to fill the seat of retiring Supreme Court Justice Tom C. Clark. On August the 30th, after a heated debate, the Senate confirmed Marshall's nomination by a vote of 69 to 11. Okay. June the 13th, 823, Alexander the Great dies. Alexander the Great, the young Macedonian military genius who forged an empire stretching from the eastern Mediterranean to India, dies in Babylon, which is in present-day Iraq, at the age of 33. June the 13th, 1971, the New York Times publishes the Pentagon Papers. The New York Times began publishing portions of the 47-volume Pentagon analysis of how the U.S. commitment in Southeast Asia grew over a period of 3 decades. Let's see. June the 13th, 1807, Thomas Jefferson subpoenaed in Aaron Burr's treason trial. President Thomas Jefferson receives a subpoena to testify at the treason trial of his former Vice President Aaron Burr on June the 13th in 1807. In the subpoena, Burr asked Jefferson to produce documents that might exonerate him. And as we know, Burr, in a duel, shot and killed Alexander Hamilton. Those were the days when American politics was really deadly. Let's see. Let's see. June the 13th, 1864. Ulysses Grant swings towards Petersburg. On June the 13th, the bulk of the Army of the Potomac begins moving towards Petersburg, Virginia, precipitating a siege that lasted for more than 9 months. From early May, the Union Army hounded Robert E. Lee's army in Northern Virginia as it tried to destroy the Confederates. And June the 13th, 1895, the first auto race held from Paris, Bordeaux, Paris. On June the 13th, in 1895, Emile Levasseur drives a Panhard et Levasseur car with a two-cylinder 750 RPM 4-horsepower Daimler Phoenix engine over the finish line in the world's first real automobile race. And June the 14th. Oh, excuse me. Get me another drink. June the 14th, 1777. The U.S. Congress adopts the Stars and Stripes to be the United States flag, which at that point it looked quite different. During the American Revolution, the Continental Congress adopts a resolution stating that the flag of the United States be 13 alternate stripes, red and white, and that the Union be 13 stars, white in a blue field, representing a new constellation. The national flag, which became known as the Stars and Stripes, was based on the Grand Union flag, a banner carried by the Continental Army in 1776 that also consisted of 13 red and white stripes. Now, of course, the U.S. flag is very similar today. It still consists of the 13 red and white alternating stripes, which represents the 13 colonies. And then you have in the blue field 50 stars, which represent the current status of all 50 states in the U.S. Let's see. June the 14th, 1982, the Falklands War ends. After suffering through 6 weeks of military defeats against British armed forces, Argentina surrenders to Great Britain, ending the Falklands War. The Falkland Islands, located about 300 miles south off the tip of Argentina, had long been claimed by the British. June the 14th, 1789, Bounty Mutiny survivors reach Timor. English Captain William Bligh in 1800s cast adrift from the HMS Bounty 7 weeks before, reached Timor in the East Indies before traveling nearly 4,000 miles in a small open boat. Okay. June the 14th, 1940. Germany invades Paris. On June the 14th in 1940, Parisians awakened to the sound of a German accented voice announcing via loudspeakers that a curfew was being imposed for 8 p.m. that evening as German troops enter and occupy Paris. Huh. June the 14th, 1968, Dr. Spock convicted for aiding draft resistors. A federal district court jury in Boston convicts Dr. Benjamin Spock and 3 others, including Yale University chaplain William Sloane Coffin Jr., of conspiring to aid, abet, and counsel draft registrants to violate the Selective Service Act. June the 14th, 1922, Warren G. Harding becomes the first president to be heard on radio. Okay. June the 14th, 1811, writer and abolitionist Harriet Beecher Stowe is born. Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, is born on June the 14th in Litchfield, Connecticut, the 7th child of Congregationalist minister Lyman Beecher. Stowe studied at private schools in Connecticut and worked as a teacher in Hartford for 5 years. June the 14th, 1985, TWA Flight 847 is hijacked by terrorists. TWA Flight 847 from Athens to Rome is hijacked by Shiite Hezbollah terrorists who immediately demand to know the identity of those with Jewish sounding names. 2 of the Lebanese terrorists, armed with grenades and a 9mm pistol, then forced the plane to land in Beirut. And that's it for history. With that done, let's proceed to the top 10 idiots of the week for June the 8th through June the 14th. In no particular order, Kellyanne Conway for repeatedly violating the Hatch Act. Joe Biden for trying to say that Wall Street is good for the economy when it only helps the few. Brian Kilmeade for claiming we went to Iraq to liberate and rebuild them. Dave Rubin. Yeah. Kilmeade, even I could see this when I was in my early 20s that we didn't go there to liberate Iraq. We went there to try to get our hands on the oil. Let's be honest. Dave Rubin for claiming Steven Crowder's homophobic jokes prevent violence. Doug Ford for lying and comparing himself to Tommy Douglas. Tommy Lahren for being a complete snowflake and saying she is straight and proud of her straightness. Kanye West for whining that people don't like his hat and criticize it, calling it bullying. Wah, Kanye. Greg Gutfeld for claiming Trump is more anti-establishment than Bernie. And AOC is worshipped by the New York Times. No. The New York Times does not like AOC. You're clearly an idiot, Gutfeld. Elizabeth Harrington for proclaiming that there are Mussolinis on the left who want to ban planes without any evidence to back it up. And of course, Donald Trump for being the complete and utter moron he always is. And that is the top 10 idiots of the week for June the 8th through the 14th. That means all we have left is the news of the week. Let's start. Well, let's have a drink first. Start on Saturday. From Status Quo, an article, Joe Biden and his racist history. From Secular Talk, Elizabeth Harrington, with no evidence to back her claim, says some Dems are like Benito Mussolini and want to ban planes. Greg Gutfeld tries to proclaim that Trump is more anti-establishment than Bernie. Really? Really, Gutfeld? I know you're supposed to push this propaganda for Trump, but I don't see how anybody's supposed to believe that. The establishment is scared of Bernie. They aren't scared of Trump. They would rather have Trump than Bernie. That tells you who is more anti-establishment. The rich, Howard Schultz, former CEO of Starbucks, would rather have Trump than Bernie. They're so scared of a man who's willing to make the rich pay, as opposed to Trump, who has given them a huge tax cut. Yeah, Trump isn't anti-establishment, Gutfeld. But what do I expect from the Fox News cronies? Elizabeth Warren is blindly following the military-industrial complex. While I do like some of the things she does economically, she pushes some good bills economically. Yeah, she does follow the military-industrial complex a little too much. Kanye West, in an interview with David Letterman, whines about being bullied for his MAGA hat. Oh, Kanye! States are trying to end the Electoral College and making the popular vote decide the election. From Democracy Now!, Ava DuVernay, showing her film on the Central Park 5, describes how the system is built to be racist. From the Rational National, the clash between Bernie and Biden on women's reproductive rights. From the Humanist Report, Tomi Lahren, so triggered that there is a gay pride month, says she is straight and proud of it. Lahren, woman, idiot. I got news for you. There's a gay pride parade and gay pride month, because to show gay pride can be dangerous. These are people who have been killed, who have been beaten for being gay. I don't know many people that have been killed or beaten for being straight. That's the point of gay pride parades, gay pride month. God, she's such an idiot. I'm just a redneck, and I know this. Why are you so stupid? And a new report finds that climate change could set human extinction in motion by 2050. God, climate deniers are such morons. They really are. This is by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They do science by several countries, to verify the information. It's not just a one-sided thing. Oh, why do people not get this? I'll tell you why. Money. And from Vice News, a look at Joe Biden's flip-flop on the Hyde Amendment. A look at an app that is like Uber but connects older adults with college kids. Kind of like grandkids for pay. And on Sunday, from Democracy Now!, how the media's use of the name Central Park 5 turned innocent kids into a gang. From the Patriot Act, an in-depth look at Sudan's toppling of Omar al-Bashir by the people in a military-led coup, and now the military is still in charge, but the people want a democracy, leading to the current clashes. From the Rational National, David Doe looks at the David Pakman interview on Joe Rogan's show mainly that YouTube doesn't have a left-wing bias, but a corporate bias, which is true. YouTube goes after left-wing channels just as much as they go after right-wing. In fact, less so it seems like anymore. Because, the right-wing whine, "Why are you attacking us?" So it's often left-wingers that get attacked more so. It's all about corporate money. Because what is YouTube? Say it with me, business. They're a corporation. They do what? Make money. From Vice News, the Scots give their opinion of Donald Trump since he keeps wanting to claim his heritage in Scotland, saying, "My mother was from Scotland." The opinions are quite funny of Trump. If you want to watch it, I recommend it. They don't necessarily give the best of opinions of the man. From MCSC, a look at Tulsi's meeting with a Wall Street donor in a closer light. Tulsi blasts the use of impeachment for political games by the establishment. From TBTV, Tim Black examines Andrew Yang's appearance on Real Time with Bill Maher. From Last Week Tonight, John talks about the Equal Rights Amendment and the chance that it could actually pass. And from The Intercept, a look at the fact that San Francisco District Attorney, Kamala Harris's office quit cooperating with victims of clergy abuse. I can't hardly talk. From on Monday, from Status Quo, Jordan talking about Joe Biden's flip-flopping on the Hyde Amendment. Ty interviews a Bernie Sanders supporter on how it is different from 2016 in 2020. And Jordan interviews Ron Placone in Ron's push for net neutrality. From Secular Talk, Bernie signs the Progressive Economic Pledge, which presents 5 basic ideas. And Kyle looks at a new poll from the Des Moines Register. From Philip DeFranco, Phil talks about being included on a New York Times article called "The Making of a YouTube Radical." Justin Bieber challenges Tom Cruise to an MMA fight. And Detroit Pride Month interrupted by neo-Nazis who were escorted by the Detroit police. From Democracy Now!, U.S. and News headlines. The U.S. and Mexico reached a deal to prevent tariffs. Many migrant rights supporters blast the deal. Homeland Inspector report finds that ICE is in violation of migrant custody. And a bill being pushed through to stop sending weapons to Saudi Arabia. Trump vetoed a war powers resolution to try and stop the weapons deal in April. But there's another one being pushed through this time in protest in Hong Kong over a bill that would allow extradition of Hong Kong citizens to mainland China to face trials. 2 people shot dead in protest in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. House panel said that climate change will have severe effects, though White House denies it. Trans woman found dead in Rikers Island prison. A black trans woman's body found in a field in North Carolina. In Detroit, Vaughn Robinson charged with the murder of 2 gay men and a trans woman in what is believed to be a hate crime. There's fallout over Linda Fairstein's role in the Central Park 5 case. And the first wheelchair user wins a Tony Award. Also from Democracy Now!, Reverend William Barber, who was convicted of trespass after refusing to leave a sit-in over gerrymandering, talks about how gerrymandering has created a racist stronghold in the South. A look at Trump's proposed tariff deal with Mexico that Lori Wallach from Citizen.org and PublicWatch.org says created a fake crisis and created a fake solution. And a look at how NAFTA hurts Mexican workers and unions. From the Rational National, Congresswoman Katie Porter dunks on Bill Maher while making a serious point on abortion rights. And Kiefer Sutherland blasts Doug Ford on Twitter for falsely comparing himself to Sutherland's grandfather, Tommy Douglas. From Vice News, a look at immigration courts and why they are broken. From TBTV, Bernie has to give a cable news anchor an actual lesson in math. From C-SPAN, we have a clip showing John Dean's opening statement in testimony to Congress. And from Vox, a Staten Island is now building a wall to hold back the ocean. On Tuesday, from Status Quo, comments from Bernie Sanders supporters, and one pointing out that if the Democrats keep selling out, voters will stay on the couch. Joe Biden runs his 2020 campaign the way Hillary ran hers in 2016. Bernie Sanders pushes against Amazon and his push against Amazon and Jeff Bezos isn't over yet. The Koch brothers are actually intending to donate to corporate Democrats. They are so scared of progressives. From Secular Talk, MSNBC tries to turn Biden's flip-flop on the Hyde Amendment into some that looks like a graceful and thoughtful pivot. And CNN tries horribly to debate YouTube censorship and radicalization. From Philip DeFranco, people freaking out over Jaclyn Hill and JoJo Siwa makeup. A poll finds that what people say they want to see in the news stories didn't equate to what was actually consumed. A new Alabama law would require sex offenders to be chemically castrated and pay for their own therapy, though it actually may be unconstitutional. A Russian investigative reporter arrested by Russia and accused of transporting drugs. Then protests flare and he is later released. From Democracy Now!, U.S. and World Headlines. Judge over the case that put Lula da Silva in prison aided police and prosecutors in the case. House Judiciary Committee and Justice Department agreed on handover of material. AMLO refuted a Trump claim on Twitter. Kushner failed to declare holdings in Cadre when he was in the White House. Accusations that Elaine Chao has been using her position as Secretary of Transportation to help enrich her husband, Mitch McConnell. Missouri granted an injunction to keep the only abortion clinic in the state open. Canada plans to ban several single-use plastics, citing EU to do the same. Mali says an armed raid. Mali has an armed raid, killing several people. The U.S. ambassador claims Israel has a right to annex parts of the West Bank. U.S. filed extradition of Julian Assange. California became the first state to offer health care to undocumented adults. See, up to this point, they hadn't been granted health care, but the idiots kept crying they were. Now they're actually going to be granted health care. Now you can actually wind that fact. NRA has given money to 18 people, according to an investigation. Hundreds showed up to protest the death of a trans black woman in Rikers Island, who was found dead in Rikers Island prison. Now, other stories. Australian police raid network after it exposed war crimes in Afghanistan. A talk with Jay Inslee on climate change, tax breaks for Boeing, and why he feels Trump is a racist. And a look at Inslee's climate crisis plan. From the Rational National, a look at Jon Stewart slamming Congress for failing to renew the 9/11 Responders Bill. From the Humanist Report, Sanders and Warren compete to have the best student debt cancellation plan. After refusing Jay Inslee's request for a climate change debate, Tom Perez is confronted by activists. And Dave Rubin tries to claim Steven Crowder's homophobic jokes help prevent violence. From Vice News, Trump's tariffs and the weather making life complete and absolute hell for farmers. From MCSC, Elizabeth Warren included on a poll about women of color. Nico House examines video from Emma Vigeland on TYT that Elizabeth Warren is better than Bernie on domestic issues. And a theme song for Tulsi Gabbard named Tulsi Time. From TBTV, Tim examines policy proposals from Elizabeth Warren. And from some more news, a look at Israel and how it has seemingly become impossible to criticize their policies without being accused of being anti-Semitic. And from C-SPAN, Jon Stewart's opening statement to push for the 9/11 first responder law to be renewed, and a clip of Jon Stewart testifying for the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund. On Wednesday, from Status Coup, a look at the campaign trail that the corporate media won't report on. Biden's campaign slogan of "Make America America Again" just seems to signify the corruption that Trump railed against, when it should be "Make America Better." News that a company called AES is causing the spread of toxic coal ash in Puerto Rico, poisoning the people. From Secular Talk, Joe Biden looking desperate, recalling the Obama presidency, and Brian Kilmeade is an utter moron on foreign policy. From Philip DeFranco, a profile on Tinder with a Snapchat gender swap filter picture ended up bringing an arrest. Dr. Disrespect may have lost his Twitch channel over a section of a stream from a bathroom at E3. And protest over China's new extradition law for citizens of Hong Kong. From Democracy Now!, U.S. and World News headlines. Riots in Hong Kong over the extradition bill. Scott Warren's trial for providing food and water to migrants has ended in a verdict of a mistrial. Has ended in a mistrial. There we go. House lawmakers authorized a jury committee to sue the Trump administration. Donald Trump Jr. to testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee. Russian press rallied around Ivan Golanov after he was arrested, then released with matching newspaper headlines. Protests leaders and the military council resume talks in Sudan. The LGBT activists celebrate the overturn of an anti-LGBTQ laws in Botswana. Ken Cuccinelli gets role of head of citizenship and immigration services. Jon Stewart blasted Congress for failing to act for the 9/11 Victim Relief Fund renewal. Alabama governor signed a law to have child sex predators be chemically castrated. Housing rights advocates celebrate passage of laws to protect homeowner rights. And for other news, a DHS, Detective of Homeland Security Watchdog, has confirmed horrific conditions in immigrant jails that include overcrowding, rotten food, and nooses. And secret Brazil files show there was foul play behind the imprisonment of Lula da Silva. From the Rational National, David chats with Sahil of Progressive Voice about YouTube's complete failure to properly handle the Crowder Maza incident. And Fox News contributor Charles Payne believes Bernie Sanders' speech is convincing. From the Humanist Report, Elizabeth Warren's plans have been good, except for her lack of one for healthcare. Capitalism endangers our democracy, such as the Koch brothers funding corporate Democrats in the primary, even though they were the funding force behind the Republican Tea Party. From Vice News, the new US-Mexico deal does almost nothing for the immigrant crisis. Trans activist Miss Major remembers the Stonewall riots, and a look at why there are protests in Hong Kong. From MCSC, Tulsi Gabbard introducing legislation to take away presidential power to declare wars and put it back in Congress. A look at Shahid Buttar, the man primarying Nancy Pelosi. Biden literally promises to cure cancer if elected president. And Bernie gives an amazing defense of democratic socialism. From C-SPAN, a video of Representative Elijah Cummings on the contempt of Congress vote. And from Vox, a better explanation of the Green New Deal. On Thursday, from Status Quo, in an interview with Nina Turner, she says Bernie Sanders will stand up to the wealthy like FDR did. An interview with one of Sanders' supporters says it is time to take our country back from immoral corporations. An interview with Bernie Sanders supporters, with one pointing out how the corporate media tries to hide the truth about the oligarchy. Joe Biden gave the same kind of platitudes on Wall Street that Hillary Clinton would have very well used and been proud of. Corporate News basically wrote down what the police said over the death of a handcuffed black man shot 20 times. Instead of reporting news, they played stenographers. Oh, the police say this. No one else interviewed. From Secular Talk, AOC pushes to make it easier to study shrooms for medical use. Government officials claim that bright purple water is okay, but not to drink or bathe in until it clears. From Philip DeFranco, Jessica Biel helped push to crack down on certain medical exemptions from vaccines from certain places. A Chernobyl document on HBO suddenly caused a sudden spike in tourism to the site, including from Instagram influencers. Protest in Memphis, Tennessee over the death of a handcuffed black man shot 20 times. From Democracy Now! The U.S. and world news headlines. 2 oil tankers evacuated off the Strait of Oman for fears of explosion. The House Oversight Committee to hold William Barr and Wilbur Ross in contempt. Donald Trump Jr. testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee. President Trump met with Polish president to sign a military agreement. Houthi rebels attacked an airport in South Sudan. House members grilled State Department members over Trump's plan to circumvent Congress to sell missiles and bombs to Saudi Arabia and UAE. Authorities shut down debate in Hong Kong over the extradition bill the day after violent protests. A 5-year-old boy and mother dead from Ebola in Uganda. Members of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe turned back construction equipment for pipeline in South Dakota. Britain's Home Secretary has signed release for extradition of Julian Assange to the U.S. Bernie Sanders offered a defense of democratic socialism in an address Wednesday. And other stories. Despite the police crackdown, the historic Hong Kong protests against the new extradition law continued. Mistrial declared after jury refuses to convict Scott Warren for providing aid to migrants. And community demands answers for the death of a Latin trans woman, Layleen Polanco, at Rikers Island. From the National Rational, Bernie Sanders calls for the release of Lula da Silva. And Bernie unveiled his economic Bill of Rights and his defense of democratic socialism. From the Humanist Report, Bernie defends democratic socialism as a continuation of FDR's legacy. And Howard Schultz put his campaign on hold, but threatens to jump back in if Biden tanks. I told you, the establishment is actually scared of Bernie. They're not scared of Trump. Vice News. From Vice News, the U.S. Army is painting Trump's border fence. A trailer for Are We Alone, which is Vice News series on the search for extraterrestrial life. From TBTV, Tim interviews Shahid Buttar and looks at how a Nancy Pelosi-led impeachment may cost her her House seat. From C-SPAN, Nancy Pelosi says Trump does not know right from wrong. White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders to leave. Kim Kardashian gives full remarks at the White House for the Second Chance and Re-Entry event. And from Vox News, a look at a series called Missing Chapters. On Friday, From Status Coup, all criminal charges in the Flint water crisis dropped by the new DA. CNN cuts away from a Bernie Sanders speech after he criticizes unfettered capitalism. A Bernie Sanders supporter says we need socialism for everyone, not just the rich. The booming economy versus reality. A look at the homelessness epidemic swallowing America. And the British Home Secretary signed the extradition release of Julian Assange to the US. From Secular Talk, pharma company raised the anti-seizure medication from $40 to $38,892. Seth Moten says he left a 5-year-old boy to die in Iraq and it caused him PTSD. From Philip DeFranco, an in-depth look at the billion-dollar industry esports have become. From Democracy Now!, the U.S. and world news headlines. Mike Pompeo blamed Iran for the tanker incident in the Strait of Hormuz. Head of the FEC announced that candidates are banned from accepting foreign help after Trump said he might take such help. Sarah Huckabee Sanders to step down at the end of June. Federal watchdog advised Kellyanne Conway has violated the Hatch Act. 7 migrant bodies found that were believed to have been drowned in the Rio Grande. Indian officials blaming heat wave for 30-plus deaths. The man who massacred people in Christchurch, New Zealand, pled not guilty. An Israeli panel found Israel may have violated human rights in February. Prosecutors dropped all charges in Flint water crisis. New York signed a bill to end religious exemptions for vaccines. Elizabeth Warren to introduce a bill to end up to $50,000 in student loan debt for millions of people. As far as other headlines, U.S. accuses an attack on the Japanese and Norwegian tankers in the Gulf of Oman to be Iran's fault. Ola Bini was friends with Julian Assange and has been jailed in Ecuador for 2 months without charge. Israeli attorney Leah Simmel reflects on defending Palestinians who have resisted occupation, and a speech by trans rights by India Moore. From the Rational National, lineups for the first 2 Democratic debates are set. Lee Carter tells MSNBC how Democrats can actually win. From the Humanist Report, a look at an Iowa voter panel and their thoughts. From Vice News, the last days of a group known as the White Helmets in Syria, and a look at the Muslim patrol that is now looking out for Brooklyn mosques. From MCSC, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren placed in separate debate lineups. Cops shoot at a sleeping man 55 times and say it was necessary and reasonable. Kamala Harris has fell to 4th place in her home state, according to a new poll. From TBTV, the Democratic Party released the lineups for 2 primary debates, and Tim looks at the pros and cons of these lineups. And finally, from C-SPAN, Acting Defense Secretary says the U.S. is working to build an international consensus on Iran. And that is the news headlines. And that is my week in review. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, and learn. And I will see you all again in the next video. But until then, later.